one of tape one, side A technically, and this is Myra, Radel, Amorosi. I am an interviewer, and I am about to conduct an interview on today's date, Sunday, November the 9th, 2003, for the California Social Welfare Archives Oral History Project, which is part of the University of Southern California. The subject of the interview today is Gail Abarbanel, who is the director of the Rape Treatment Center located within the Santa Monica Hospital in Santa Monica at 1250 16th Street. Again, this is Tape 1, Side A. Gail, the first question I'd like to ask is something about your background, how you got involved initially as a youngster perhaps, or a family situation where social work became an interest to you. Was there anything specific that triggered your involvement in social work?
I was born in Los Angeles and grew up in Los Angeles, and my parents, my mother actually volunteered at Vista Del Mar. And at that time, Vista Del Mar was different than it is today. It was more like the Jewish orphanage.
Right.
And in the summer, I used to go, when she volunteered, I used to go with her and be there, during the day, and do activities with the kids and spend time there. And then my parents also took the kids that were in placement at Vista Del Mar on outings, and we would have them for dinner on holidays like Thanksgiving, and I can remember taking them to outings like to the ballet or the theater. We would do things, and I think that probably had a significant influence on me.
Your mother wasn't trained as a social worker?
No, not at all.
She was just a volunteer?
But she was just a volunteer. And my parents also were just people who helped people, people in our family and other people in the community. So I knew that I wanted to be a social worker.
At what age?
I don't remember the exact age, but I remember when I went to college, when I was ready to go to college, I knew I wanted to be a social worker and go to social work school. So I went to UCLA for my undergraduate, and then I went to USC for graduate school. And I had two professors at USC who that influenced me very significantly in the way I think about things and just in my social work values. One was Alice Overton, and the other was Barbara Solomon.
And what did you really, when you said they influenced you, what specifically was it that triggered even more interest in social work because of these two people?
Alice Overton was like an old-time kind of grassroots social worker, who really gave, I think, her students a sense of just the dignity and respect that every client should be treated with. She worked a lot with poor children and families. And Barbara Solomon, I guess you could say one gave you the roots and one gave you your wings. Barbara Solomon gave her students the freedom to explore, I think, their academic interests in creative ways, and really encouraged us to learn about social work in unique and creative ways. So I had an interest in a writer, an author of books, who was Anais Nin, who was a very poetic
I'm not
writer.
Familiar.
You're not familiar with her. And so, just by some strange circumstance, at the same time I was in social work school and Barbara was my professor, I had the opportunity to meet her.
The writer.
The writer. And did a project, instead of doing the regular social work kind of assignment,
Right.
Did a project exploring how she dealt with human communication in her writing.
So not only did you have a background from school, but in addition to that, you were working with somebody else who gave you a deeper insight or a different insight.
But it was sort of like a different way to learn what other people might learn in a more traditional way.
Okay.
About looking at situations and communication between people.
Reaching out to them, perhaps.
Right. She just she was an amazing writer and lived a kind of bohemian life. But
and you were.
And then Barbara. I continued to have a relationship with her throughout my social work career. But
when did you graduate from SC?
I graduated in '68.
And.
Yeah, 68.
And what degree did you have at that time?
Oh, I had my MSW. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I had my bachelor's degree from UCLA in '66, and then went straight to graduate school.
And your first work.
And I had a appendicitis attack on my way to my first field work placement, and so right in the beginning of school, I had to have an epidural.
Okay, and after...
And I was the same then as I was now. I was driving to field work with my appendicitis attack.
Very first assignment. And what was your first assignment? When you finally got out of the hospital?
DCFS was my first placement.
And where?
In, like, Hawthorne, Inglewood.
Okay. So your first assignment was Hawthorne. And how long did you stay there?
A year. The assignments were a year each.
Okay. And what was your primary assignment at the facility? What were your responsibilities?
It was a child-family caseload.
Okay.
It was probably... it was more dealing with social welfare than with abuse. It wasn't abuse, really, specifically the caseload.
So initially
it was
just...
It was probably organized differently than it is now at DCFS.
Okay. So initially it was welfare and not abuse.
Right.
And something happened, though, after that
On
assignment.
my way to the rape treatment.
Yes,
Yeah.
something happened. What was it?
Well, my first social work job was at Jewish Big Brothers. When I graduated, I went to work for Jewish Big Brothers, and I worked there for, 6 years. And
What type of caseload were you involved in?
It was a Big Brother caseload and a child family therapy caseload.
Were you coming into children that were abused at that point? Emotionally, sexually?
Sometimes, but not really. It was the Big Brother caseload was more children who had lost a parent, either through death or divorce, and a lot of families. Jewish Big Brothers tends to keep families a long time in their caseload, but I learned a lot, and then I decided that I wanted to do something different, and I was thinking about what else I might want to do, and it was really very like several kind of chance events. I saw an ad in the paper for hospital social work. I decided that might be interesting.
Do you remember about what time frame? When was that?
That was in 1974, in the beginning of 1974, probably, or the middle of 1974. I was on a vacation, bought the Los Angeles Times, and I was looking in the classified.
Okay.
And I saw this ad, so I decided to go interview. Okay. And it was Santa Monica Hospital job opportunity, and they had never had a social worker before.
So you were a first...
I was the first social worker. I think they had an accreditation site visit and been told they had to hire a social worker.
Oh, and you were it.
I was it.
Okay.
So I decided to do that. So I was hired really as a medical social worker, and I had never been exposed to a hospital healthcare environment.
In those days?
In a professional way. I had, obviously, in personal ways, but...
In 1974, what did they expect you to do at the
everything.
Okay.
I think that...
Totally unlimited.
Totally unlimited. So in the beginning, I was trying... And they didn't... I don't think they really knew what to do with a social worker, so I actually turned to other social workers working in hospitals to learn about what kinds of programs they had and what kinds of services they offered. And again, another social worker was very helpful to me, Eleanor Klein, who was the director of social work.
Is that K-L-I-N-E?
K-L-E-I-N.
E-I-N.
She was at UCLA. And June Simmons was in Pasadena at Huntington Hospital. And there was a hospital social work director organization also. But, so I think I learned a lot from them. And
you instituted
so I began to provide social work services, and I was
You
a social
created.
worker. I did. I created the social work department, but it was just me in the beginning, and I was doing everything because the needs for social work just came out of the walls. You know, it was pediatric patients, cardiac patients, cancer patients. It was everything.
How long
And
were you alone? Because that's
I
pretty
was alone for probably for you know, the other thing was it was a different environment then because it was before managed care and it wasn't push people out of the hospital. It was people had much longer hospital stays and it was really quite different. And one of the first patients I saw, I was always really kind of attracted to or interested in the ER in the hospital. And I got called to see a patient who had made a suicide attempt. And when I talked with her, I unearthed the fact that she had been raped about 6 days earlier. And she was from a very prominent family in the city and felt that she felt there was nowhere to go for rape victims. There was no identified kind of agency or hotline. There was nothing. And she felt that she would be blamed and she would bring shame on her family. And I was just so moved by her experience that she would see suicide as the only way out of
her only
anguish.
alternative to this attack.
It was like the way out of her pain. And and then just coincidentally, a few days later, we had a family practice residency program at Santa Monica Hospital, and one of the family practice residents asked me to see one of his patients who was really in crisis, and it turned out that she had been raped, and she had been taken to another hospital in the community and had received really terrible treatment. She had been left in the waiting room for hours, and they came out and said, "Where's the rape?" They treated her physical injuries, but nobody talked with her about the impact. And she was like, she was a young mother with 2 kids. She had to give her kids to somebody else to take care of. I just remember she was like a faucet. You know, she was just completely unraveling, really having a crisis reaction. So I thought, what do we do for rape victims at this hospital?
What year was that?
That was 1974.
Okay, still 74.
Yeah, it was the end of. I started working there in September of '74. So it was early on, and so I decided that I would see every rape victim who came to our hospital ER, and I started reading about rape and trying to learn about it. I didn't.
It was self-taught how to deal as a social worker.
Right.
In 1974.
And it was the same year that a nurse in Boston. I have to check if this is I'm pretty sure this is the date of her art, but she had just she had done some work in the Boston City Hospital ER with rape victims, and had published an article in a psychiatric journal about rape trauma. And it was the first time that it had ever been quote named, in a psychiatric journal. Anyway, so I decided I would see every rape victim that came to our hospital, and as it turned out, when they did come, there weren't that many at that time, but when they came often on the weekend or at night when I wasn't there. And if I tried to follow up and contact them, because I wasn't on site when they were in the ER, and it was very hard to connect with them. I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to think about it, I'm going to move on with my life.
Because it was always after the fact.
Yeah, and there's always...
Not the trauma of the immediacy. It was after this had happened. And
if I tried to follow up and contact them the next day, and it took a few days or whatever, so I decided that I would put myself on call.
This was your decision?
Yes, this was my decision, and I would come in whenever a rape victim was there.
And this was policy you're just creating as you go along?
Right. One thing I did from the beginning when I started working there was I always wrote memos to I didn't have some of these. I always wrote memos to my boss about what I was doing and how I was thinking about what I was doing.
Who was your boss?
He was a hospital administrator who had never met a social worker before, and but I always let him know of the needs I was identifying and how I was responding.
So there was a chain of information. He
Right.
always was informed.
Right.
as the administrator and you were superior
Right.
at the hospital.
Right.
You're,
It's also a way to build support for what I was doing.
absolutely. You were keeping him informed
Right.
as you were creating this new policy at the Santa Monica Hospital without a role model, really, other than what you had picked up on your own. Is that correct?
Yes. So
I'm going to stop one.
Okay.
Make sure we're... Gail, would you at this time remember how you set up the machinery to be notified when a rape victim was coming into Santa Monica Hospital, since this was all policy that you're creating?
I don't remember exactly how I did it then, but I think I probably had the nurse in the ER. We had a full-fledged emergency room, so it was a busy ER, and I think I probably had the nurse page me when a victim came in.
And when this first happened, the first time your beeper went off and you responded,
I remember the first victim distinctly. I don't know that I can remember the first few distinctly. I remember some of them, certainly, but I don't. I just remember that it made a huge difference in terms of connecting with the patient and being able to help the patient. It was so worth it.
because
when the trauma is so fresh, before their defenses go up, it was just much easier to provide. And I saw immediately that the most important aspect of rape treatment was not the physical medical care of the patient, but the emotional trauma they suffered was usually much more severe than physical injuries. Most rape victims didn't have serious physical injuries. So
it's the hidden emotion.
it was the psychological impact of the trauma, which is more invisible. So then I decided that we had to incorporate psychological interventions in the ER medical setting. Now, this may be hard for me to trace exact timing because so many things happened at the same time, but
you were beginning to realize that getting to the patient immediately, the victim,
right,
while they're still extraordinarily vulnerable,
right,
and needing the most assistance so that they
that
don't...
a social worker has to offer, which is crisis counseling and support and advocacy and accompaniment through the procedures, through...
And being a support system, because what you've described, they weren't getting this emotional, psychological support.
No.
It was a physical examination
Right.
without any of the emotional care that a rape victim is requiring.
This was before hospital protocols trained police officers, rape kits. This was before there was any kind of infrastructure.
And sensitivity.
And sensitivity. And there was I'd have to really look, which I could do, look at the dates that this happened, but when we developed a model for providing care, especially the psychological piece of the care in the medical setting, there was a doctor in the hospital who also worked at, had a kind of a research background. There was a national rape center in the federal government, in the Department of Mental Health and Health and Human Services, for probably like an 8-year period, and it was actually later abolished by President Reagan and was never reinstituted, but there was a National Center for the Prevention and Control of Rape, is what it was called.
So there must have been guidelines.
No, there weren't guidelines, but we applied for a grant to take our model and disseminate it across the country. So we actually got a grant to make a film and a training package about our model for providing victim care. And we developed, we had a national meeting with a few people that had knowledge in this area. We developed the materials, and then we did pilot testing in Louisiana and Boston and different parts of the country, rural and urban sites, and we made a film, and then it was disseminated by the federal government.
Who's the we?
It was mostly, it was me and other people who worked on it.
People that you brought in?
To make a film and training materials.
But
and I'm trying to remember when I got the second social worker. I don't know.
That's what I was curious about.
I'd have to look back.
This was all your creativity based on your own work. There wasn't anybody. You said there was a doctor who had some exposure to federal
applying for grants.
For the grant, But you're putting all this together in the first instance and creating all of this.
Right.
And
And I was doing all the other medical social work at the same time.
for the
for
aged
the hospital,
and,
right.
I mean,
Right. And I had a lot of other interests because I loved being in the hospital, medical social work. And at some point, I started adding staff for social work coverage.
were they doing the other aspects of social work at the hospital while you focused on the rape trauma syndrome?
No, they were as I added. I think the first thing I added was because the hospital needs was a discharge planner. Actually, now that I remember.
A discharge planner?
Yeah,
And that term means what?
that means somebody who helps patients with their plans for aftercare when they leave the hospital. They need to nursing home or in-home care. Actually, I just remembered something else I did, which was a really an Alice Overton kind of social work thing to do, which was that the hospital. This wasn't about the rape treatment center, but the hospital had this family practice clinic, and they saw people who couldn't afford private practice medical care. It was a low cost medical care clinic, and they actually had a means test. They used to give these families this horrible means test to establish eligibility.
Economic eligibility.
Yeah, economic eligibility. It was terrible. And they used to ask them questions that I felt were really inappropriate, invasive, and like you didn't even need to ask them to decide that you could take this patient into your clinic and provide care. So I remember I did a study to show them they could establish eligibility without asking questions about how much they spend on food and rent and so forth. And we abolished the means test. So that was a good thing. But that wasn't about the rape treatment center. But that was early. Now it's coming back to me because I think when I first came, they gave me they had they called her a social worker, but she wasn't an MSW. She was just like a means test person working in this clinic, and she had to report. She reported to me, and so when I saw what she was having to do and feeling uncomfortable about doing it, then we worked out a way to make it go, to change it, to get rid of it. She was probably more like an administrative, clerical person, and I think they called her a social worker because she dealt with the financial aspects of eligibility for these medical care services.
Or to pigeonhole her for salary or something.
I don't know.
But getting back to
anyway, so back to the rape treatment center.
So it's now you're providing films that are going to be.
So we were providing in the beginning, the rape treatment center really was providing services for victims seen in the hospital ER, which 25 years later comes around to a different thing. But and then doing this national training project kind of put us on a national scale. The other thing I remember happening, and I have this article, was that when we had seen 17 victims, I think that was the headline in the LA Times. It was like an LA Times story because that was like such a big number, and now I can have that in a week, but I can't remember the time period. But it was really, it was the first hospital to have a hospital-based rape treatment center. Now, around this time is when the women's movement started, and the Speak Out's rape crisis centers started to be formed, which were a lot of across the country, sprinkles of kind of grassroots volunteer organizations that were mostly formed by women who had been raped to help other women, and they were kind of volunteer paraprofessional organizations. And at that time, the biggest issues for rape victims were how the police treated them or mistreated them, how the hospitals mistreated or mistreated them. And there's a lot of bad treatment of victims. And the rape crisis centers, I remember what I did initially when I was like, oh God, what are we doing for rape? When I saw this woman who was suicidal, I started trying to talk to other people, to find out what they were doing. And there was there was a rape crisis center in LA, a hotline. It was a hotline, not a crisis center. And I remember talking to them about how could hospitals do better, or what could hospitals do. And they were very anti-police. They were very anti-police reporting because they thought the police were bad to victims. We should get victims not to report so they won't be treated badly.
Were these people who are manning the hotlines, were they trained social workers?
Yeah. I mean,
There's
nowadays we probably won't put this in the transcription, but now there are more standards that the state imposes, but in those days it was,
A
a lot
volunteer.
of them were victims who hadn't resolved their own
Conflicts.
issues about being raped.
But
But anyway,
it
they
was as
were
much as
very
you had.
anti-police.
Okay.
And I just decided
This
it's
triggered.
not a good idea to do that, because it's better to try to educate the police and fix them than to try to keep victims out of the criminal justice system. For every reason, for community safety and for the victim feeling like she has support from the legal system. And so we never coerced anyone, but we always encouraged reporting, and that created some negative feelings on the part of some of these other agencies towards the Rape Treatment Center. We were more institutionally based, but it was really more a philosophy issue. And when you see, you realize you've seen 2 victims or 3 victims of the same rapist, and if one victim doesn't report, somebody else can get raped. I just thought it was better to fix the police.
You had a practical goal. You were trying, from what you're saying, to understand why some responses of victims, especially in a counseling situation, would be very negative for society overall, because they had been treated improperly and were passing on, or possibly in an effort to protect other victims, they might be giving advice that is not sound, but because of their own experiences, they were taking a certain path.
It's also like there's so many things wrong with that picture. It's too, and I think now things have turned around a lot across the country. I think over the last 2 decades, even the more radical rape crisis centers realized that it's better to collaborate than to isolate yourself and to have these,
To educate
this kind of
as many
friction.
as possible, so that everybody is working toward a common goal.
It wasn't an easy task. I can remember the first time we ever put on a training program for the police at the hospital, and I still actually have one of these. They made paper airplanes and threw them during the training.
No,
It was like,
I can visualize
yeah,
that.
I don't have to show it to you.
I can well visualize, because there's a certain, early on, what I saw, and this was in the
Yeah,
early
you were in the DA's
70s.
office.
I was seeing from a law enforcement standpoint on the other side, how the attitudes of a lot of police officers, there weren't too many female police officers.
Right.
These were male, it was a male bastion. And their attitudes sometimes were totally unrealistic, and they were very insensitive.
Right.
They needed to be educated. And this comes about slowly. It doesn't happen overnight.
No, I just told somebody Friday at work, it's a lifetime commitment. It really is.
Yes, it is a lifetime commitment. But you, now the film or films that you were able to make and sending them across the country, so that
First we field tested it in different sites in different communities, and had some really interesting experiences and learned a lot about different ways rape was handled in different places. I remember in Louisiana it was considered a coroner's case. The coroner did your rape exam. But anyway, then once we pilot tested a videotape, and then a film was made and it was disseminated.
now the film, if you'll forgive me, I just want to
Okay.
really hone in on this. The educational film that you were putting
Right.
together was to sensitize and give some method of sequence for what should be done when a person who is raped comes into a medical facility.
It was the medical and psychological aspects of victim care. It was how to integrate psychological interventions in the medical care process, and it also demonstrated how to provide medical and evidentiary exams
To preserve the forensic...
in a sensitive way. So it modeled how the doctor should talk with the patient and interact with the patient while they did the technical procedures.
Right. So basically, it's a learning tape for the medical personnel that are going to be in contact with the victim, certainly the police, and also for the other technical people that come in contact with the victim, how to preserve evidence of the rape itself.
Yes.
Were you into?
Yes, and also the crisis, the advocates or counselors that included their role.
And to my knowledge, this is a very early,
Yeah, very early.
a very, very early training device.
Right.
So that even for later prosecution,
Right.
you're preserving evidence. And
This was before DNA, before, this is,
right, where all they
Now
had is
it's a
blood
lot more
typing.
right.
At that, in
Right.
those days, you're just talking about whether it was possible that this
right.
donor
Exactly.
could have left this sample.
Right.
The semen even matched his blood type,
Right.
which didn't. There weren't identifying markers in
No.
those days, to my knowledge.
No.
So what you were doing, it was the very beginnings of how everybody who's involved would be educated in doing this in a way that would be more sensitive to the immediate needs of the victim herself, to protect her as much as possible, and yet protect the law enforcement interest and give her psychological well-being a start as well,
Right.
so that they
Yes.
weren't in
Right.
contradiction with each
Right.
other. And were the tapes used, were they actually used by various states or
They
cities?
were, yeah, they were used by hospitals, and actually, this makes me remember all this. There was a big article in the American Hospital Association magazine about what we were doing, which I have.
Late 70s was this thing?
Yeah, it was. And some of the other medical journals, hospital publications. It got a lot of publicity.
Now, Gail, you're talking about adult women. I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about it.
This was about the adult victim. Yeah, it wasn't about
Okay.
children.
You were not branching off at this early stage in the 70s
No.
with either children or with women who might have been institutionalized who were raped. None of these other categories. These
No.
were just adult women.
Right. Men or adult victims.
Okay, and not with males either. Males that have been raped. It was strictly adult females.
Well, the materials said that the same procedures and the same guidelines apply to male victims. The victim pictured in the tape was a female. But
I mean, that would have really been avant-garde because
yeah.
So now you're trying to disseminate a tape which is going to be used
This is kind of our model for victim care to others across the country.
Can you tell me what happened when you got this team on board utilizing these new techniques? Did you see a difference in ease of prosecution? Did you see more of a mental recovery by the patient in a shorter period of time? What were the reactions in reality to what you set in motion?
Well, I think there was also a lot of learning that you can't just do. You're dealing with ER staff who deal with
Nothing's
so many
happening
other
immediately.
issues. That you have to institutionalize the training. It can't be just like once. Okay, there's a new way to treat rape victims. You're dealing with a large group of people who turn over and take different jobs,
And go from hospital to hospital.
Yeah. So, I think then at some point, we realized you have to try to get hospital association. You have to have guidelines and requirements and standards that are formally adopted by professional organizations. So in the beginning, we worked with the hospital council, the Southern California Hospital Council, so that actually the first time it was probably 1976, we put on a local training conference. It was the first conference in the United States on hospital-based rape treatment, and we did it in conjunction with, I'm trying to remember who the DA was that did it with us, but we did it in conjunction with the hospital council because that gave it more clout to help it get adopted as a standard. And then we started to develop a protocol, and I was on the committee to develop. First it was at a local level, then a state level, then a national level, We realized you had to get this kind of training into the schools that prepare people for the professions that are going to be, and into the academies that train police officers, into social work schools, nursing schools, medical school. So we started doing a lot of training and consultation.
When did you start to see?
Yeah, I don't know if I got it time-wise.
It had to be very gradual.
Yeah.
Because again, you're having staff at the hospital that are, as you indicated.
And it's also a relatively, for a lot of hospitals, in those days, it was a relatively rare event. So it's harder to
get
a
interest.
high-level standard of care and have people learn something when
They may
have
not
heart attacks every day and gunshot wounds every day, things that they're give more attention to.
Did you see that there was a credibility issue with the victim's believability to staff and law enforcement, or was this not an issue?
There are a lot of attitudes people have about rape and women who report that they've been raped, and I think that we realized it was not just credibility issues, but it was that for most of the people who work in hospital ERs are nurses, and this really hits close to home because you have these patients come in and they live in your neighborhood, they got raped at a restaurant parking lot you've been to, so it touches on your own vulnerability, and a lot of the blame the victim attitudes that you see are really a way to distance yourself from feeling vulnerable, and so I think we realized that we had to address those issues in the training so that the nurses could be more responsive to the victim's needs. And obviously this is still an issue today, 25 years later.
I was going to comment that I had frequently, and I'd like you to correct this.
Okay.
I had often, early on, seen that victims do blame themselves. Mm-hmm. They feel that they were walking down a dark street when they should have known better, or they didn't scream.
Right.
And even though there was a knife and they were threatened if they screamed, they were going to be cut. But because they didn't attempt, and then frequently they were questioned, well, didn't you scream? Didn't you do this? Didn't you do that? It was almost an accusation, and then they took the blame. And I'd like you to comment on something else and see if you were able to overcome it. Another issue is that I saw married women then coming back and indicating that their husbands wouldn't any longer have sexual relations with them or blame them for the rape itself, and the emotional trauma that established when the victim was trying to overcome the trauma. Then there's the added stigma that she had caused it, and family members accusing her or suggesting that she might have brought it on herself. How did you address those situations, or are you able to answer that?
Well, the first one, the resistance issue, I think the most the overriding the thing that's always remained the same from the beginning until today is that I and we who work at the Rape Treatment Center, we've always tried to take what we learned from victims' experiences and translate it into social action, like policy reforms or prevention programs or whatever. And I always say that the treatment we provide for victims is the heart and soul of the Rape Treatment Center, because it inspires everything else we do, it guides everything else we do, it determines it really does. And we were seeing, just hearing victims describe what happened during the assault, it was clear that most victims are so over the fear that's instilled in them often results in non-resistance, and it's not very different from consent. And we were seeing cases where the victim didn't resist and the case couldn't be prosecuted because of their non-resistance. And we finally had just an incredible case where a young woman was taking an RTD bus from downtown, from Arco, in the middle of the day, on a hot summer August day, and she was a UCLA student, and she's taking the bus back to the UCLA campus. She ended up being the only passenger left on the bus. The bus gets to the last stop on Hillgard, right where the turnaround is. The driver says there's only one way you're getting off this bus. She begs him to let her off the bus. He refuses. She tried to open the door, but he had control of the locking mechanism. She was locked in that hot bus, and he came towards her and grabbed her, and she froze. She was incapable of resisting, and he took her to the back of the bus and raped her. Her case was rejected for prosecution because of her non-resistance. It was actually Steve Trott was the DA, who was a wonderful DA. I wish he would have been on the DA. And that was like the final straw for us. And we decided, you know, he said the way the California law is written, it has resistance requirements in it. So we decided that we were going to change the law. And we did a lot of research. This was a real significant event in the history of the Rape Treatment Center. It was probably 1978 or 79. And we did a lot of research on the law. The law hadn't, and I have a lot of material on this. The law had been written in 1872. It had never been changed. There was no other crime that had resistance requirements, not even the other sex crimes like sodomy or forced oral copulation that men can be victims of, only rape, vaginal rape. So it was a very discriminatory law because it meant rape victims had to behave in a different way than any other, you know, violent crime victim. And it was based on this archaic view of women and, you know, rape. And I remember there was a doctor working in our hospital who was French, and she had gone to medical school in France, and she had been taught that women's thigh muscles were strong enough that they could hold their legs together to resist a rape in medical school. And then, anyway, so we decided to change the law, and we did all this research. You know, we formed some alliances, partnerships. We went to the bar, Los Angeles bar, to work with us, the defense and the criminal. We had a committee. I think it was Jackie, I can't remember, or Steve Trott, and then we decided we had to educate the public about this issue. And this case was the perfect case to educate the public because people could identify with being that bus. And Noel Levine was our assembly person, and me and the legal counsel for the Rape Treatment Center, Eileen Adams, did all this.
Again?
Eileen Adams. It's Eileen with an A. We testified. We rewrote the California rape law, and we got the law passed. It was an incredible victory.
And that year?
And that year, I think the new law went into effect in 1979 or 80.
Okay.
But it was all based on what you described. You know, you saw it in your practice as a DA, and we saw it in our ER when victims described their experiences. And it was, you know, a lot of times non-resistance was the safest strategy. And actually this was a political issue too, because a lot of the rape crisis centers really didn't want us. There was a little research at that time that showed that resistance might be successful, but it also increases the chances you'll be more seriously harmed. And we, of course, presented that when we were presenting the argument that the law shouldn't, you know, you shouldn't have to make the choice that you're going to take a bigger risk to have your case prosecuted or whatever.
That you might have your throat slit.
Yeah, exactly. So we had some difference of opinion about that. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't resist. It means you have to use your own judgment, but we should respect that you shouldn't be penalized for choosing what you think is the safest strategy.
So therefore, a woman who absolutely might freeze out of fear.
Or might even choose non-resistance, not being frozen, just because she thinks it's the safest strategy.
Or believes that it'll be over faster.
And she won't get
killed.
killed.
Will survive.
Right, exactly.
And so they're not penalized, whether their judgment shouldn't be at issue.
Right.
It's the rape.
Right. And there were other states that had resistance requirements. Now there's, I think, only one or two states left, one of Louisiana.
But California was the first to take this on?
I don't know if we were the first, but we were one of the first. I can't remember if we were the first, but we...
So actually in the late 70s...
And I have some of the articles,
And you do have the materials?
Yeah, I do.
That should go into the archives.
Yeah. It was a really exciting thing to do, obviously. You know, it was very rewarding. And the bus driver case never got prosecuted because you couldn't go backwards once you changed the law. But it did result in changing the law. We had a lot of other case examples, yeah.
And I'd like to clarify that, because by the time the statute of limitations would have run, if it had never been filed, it could have been prosecuted.
When the crime was committed, the resistance requirements were in the law.
That's right.
So you couldn't.
But at the time of the crime, the individual, it would have been ex post facto.
Just like the recent Stogner thing.
Yeah. And so he has to be held to the standard, the bus driver in that situation. But from that point on, you were making a precedent and putting on the books by deleting the restraint requirement, making this a law that could be prosecuted without unfairness to it, because the restraint had been removed. Or resistance, I don't mean restraint, a resistance aspect. This is side 2, tape 1, interview with Gail Abarbanel. Gail, you were saying that you and your colleagues, primarily you.
Yeah, that was something I really did with Eileen. I think we've worked on several legislative reforms, but they all came out of cases.
Okay.
Everything came out of a case.
And that's what you were saying.
And all of our and we'll talk about it later, but campus rape program, drug facilitated rape program, they all came out of cases they all came out of the experiences of victims.
There was an experience.
It's also seeing pattern, it's really listening. And I think it's also always feeling empowered to make change. This is what I tell my staff. This all comes through you, and anytime you have a gut feeling this isn't right, or this is discriminatory treatment, or I've heard this before, you act on those feelings, because often if one victim has a bad experience, and 2 and 3, it reflects a broader social issue, not just one person's experience. It's kind of seeing in their experiences.
Well, you've changed that law and kept predators from getting away with their crimes. At least in that area.
Yeah.
What other legislative changes have come out of the Rape Trauma Center?
One other one was we had and this I think about that, we had a child, a 12-year-old, who was raped at school by another student at her middle school. She reported it right away. She was brought to the Rape Treatment Center. And when LA Unified, the case was reported to the police and was going through the criminal justice system, but in the meantime, LA Unified has to deal with the accused student and the safety of the school setting, so they were going to hold a disciplinary hearing. The child goes with her parents to a disciplinary hearing, and the parents are told, you can't go in the room with her, she has to go in the room alone, she can't have her counselor, her parents, no support person. But the accused student is allowed to have a lawyer, support people in the room. So there was no way that this was soon after the rape, she couldn't withstand that hearing on her own. So it was postponed, and LA Unified said they were basing their policy and their procedures on the California law, that the law had rights for accused students, but none for victims. And of course they could have had a more humane policy, but the law didn't, it wouldn't have been breaking the law to give her the same rights. Anyway, so we decided to, we looked at the law, and it was true. It was very unfair. There were no rights for victims. Eventually, we got them to agree that she could have one person in the room, and at that point, the parents decided to have a lawyer in the room because they didn't know what kind of action they were going to take. And we decided to change the law. And what we did was basically make parity. We added equal rights for victims to the rights of accused students. So they had the right to notice, they had the right to accompaniment or the support person, and so forth. So we changed the education code. And then when we opened Stewart House, we had cases where children, and this happens even more now, were photographed as part of the sexual abuse. Either pornography pictures or photographed or whatever, and there was no, those photographs could end up in the hands of the defense and never be returned to the court. There was no control over the photograph, so the child never knew where those photographs were going to show up in the future. So we got a law passed that required that all photographs that were related to the case were put into the custody of the court and were kept in, locked, and maintained in a locked, sealed way, so that they were needed for other crimes or whatever, or anything else, but that the child would know that they would never be seen again. And then the other really interesting thing we did was that we had a lot of cases where women who were undocumented were being raped by people who were posed as immigration officers, and they would be told, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to have you deported or have your kids taken away. It didn't qualify as rape under the rape law. It was sexual blackmail. Exactly. It was like extortion or blackmail, and it didn't involve the threat of great and immediate bodily harm. Some of the cases couldn't be prosecuted. So we got that badge of authority rape.
The appearance of authority.
Right, using a badge of authority. So that those cases could be prosecuted.
So this
But they always come out of,
they come out of need.
They come out of seeing a victim have this experience, and
it's need.
And need, yeah.
The need is there because either the victim is being penalized, or
it's like seeing the need, but also feeling like you have the possibility exists to make things better. And I think that's something I always got from. I really feel I got that from social work school. I think I got that from my mentors like Barbara or Alice Overton, and I think I've really learned that in my work, because it's very easy when you work with victimization to feel isolated and disempowered, and it's really important to think like you're, you have to feel empowered to make it better.
But you feel that your mentors, going back to SC,
I do,
gave you the ability to understand your own power and that you can change. You can bring about change. Mm-hmm. And this is what you've done. Mm-hmm. As a social worker, you haven't stopped at remaining in the hospital or at the school level. Mm-hmm. You've really gone to change and successfully succeeded, altering the minds of legislators.
Because I can tell you experiences about that.
Because you had actual case models.
Yeah.
And you're showing them where the laws aren't working.
And I also got, the other thing that really, I think, made me feel confident in the ability to do this is having community support for the Rape Treatment Center. And when the Rape Treatment Center started to grow, at some point, in the beginning, the hospital supported the growth. Okay, you can have another social worker, and they can do a little bit of the Rape Treatment Center and do medical social work. And then it got to the point where they said, no more, and they couldn't afford it, to providing more support. So I decided that I would go ask the Women's Auxiliary in the hospital to help me, because I figured, there'd be a likelihood. I knew nothing about fundraising or anything like that. So I went to them, and...
This is the Women's Auxiliary at Santa Monica Hospital now.
Yes, and it turned out there was a woman in the auxiliary who had been raped in college and had never told anyone. A horrible rape experience that she had never told. So she decided she was going to get me help. But when the hospital director heard about it, he was upset, and he called me into his office and said that I couldn't have support from them because they already raised a certain fixed amount of money for the hospital. And if some of it now went to the Rape Treatment Center, they would essentially be losing hospital support. So I was really upset. But in the end, it was probably the best thing that ever happened, because it forced me to go out. I decided I'm going to go find support somewhere, and it forced me to go out in the community. And
so you lost the ability to get the auxiliary to fund.
I think they gave me like a donation in the beginning, but then he told me I couldn't do it anymore.
All right, he wanted it all for the hospital, not for the rape center.
Right, which was part of the hospital, but...
Right, but he saw a difference.
Right. So,
you went elsewhere.
Around this time, this was one of the other turning points in my life, I think. Norman Lear was producing All in the Family.
Oh, okay.
And one day he called me, somebody in his office called me, and they said they were going to do an episode. They thought they were going to do an episode on rape, and could I come meet with them? And I went home and I told my husband that they called, but I was so busy I couldn't do it. And he said, "You have to do it," you know. So then they had Norman
Edith
call
was
me.
raped, wasn't it,
Yeah.
Edith?
So I went to meet with them, and they. This is how they got me to. They said to come meet with him. They said, "You can talk to 40 million people about rape. What do you want to say?" That was Norman's invitation. So at that time, I felt like the issues about reporting were really important. You know, that most victims didn't want to report, and how families, I thought they could deal with the family impact and stuff in their show. So it was this whole new experience of meeting with writers and, you know, learning how to do that. And anyway, it turned into an hour special instead of a half hour.
Am I right? Was
It was
Edith?
It was an attempted rape, and it was a big decision for CBS and them to decide Edith could be
the victim
of an attempted rape. But when they were doing this episode, and it got an Emmy actually in the end, a lot of people in Norman's company, a lot of women, told him they'd been raped, and they'd never told anyone. And he's this incredibly wonderful, you know, humanistic man, and he was just really affected by their experiences. And so he agreed to pay for a huge national outreach when the show aired. This was before they had those formal send out the study guides. You know, in those days they didn't have it. So we actually wrote like a study guide, and he funded it being sent. We sent it to every rape crisis center, every mental health agency in the United States. This show is going to air. Here's how you try to get your local, you know, TV station to cover it. This is a discussion guide. These are the issues that'll be kind of raised, and they got a huge amount of publicity. I have some of the clippings. You know, a lot of editorials and just newspaper coverage of Edith getting raped. And then a lot of the women in his company said, you know, if you ever need help, we'll help you. So when this happened at the hospital, I called them and said, I need help. And they helped me put together a board, a community like advisory board, and Norman was on it. And just, you know, through kind of, they helped me find other people. So that was actually the beginning of to have an advisory board for the Rape Treatment Center, and to get more community support.
And to have
and
it
to
grow.
raise money, and to have it grow.
To have it become available to more people.
Right.
And because the auxiliary at the hospital was not permitted to assist,
Yeah.
and at this time, the rape of Edith Bunker.
Yeah, and we actually had a screening at the hospital when it opened, and it was like a national event when that show aired. It was really amazing.
I would like to know how much input, when they obviously wanted to hear your viewpoint on, okay, we're giving you a forum of 40 plus million people on rape. What is it that you said you wanted to be? What did you do with that program? How did you direct them?
I actually went there every day. You know, when they were doing it, they were writing it and taping it. I went there every day, and they were very open. But I remember going in the room the first time that the woman who was the executive, who was kind of the liaison, you know, she told me, she said something to me like, you know, just remember that writers have a real sensitivity about the work, about what they've written. So when when you're going to make comments about their script, you have to say it in a way that, you know, you don't say like, that's stupid. That's not how it is. But I think when they said, what would you want to say, I said that the biggest problem we have is that most victims remain silent. And Edith at first didn't want to tell anybody, you know, didn't want to report it. So they did that. And then they had I remember they had this wonderful scene about the impact on the husband and the wife, and Archie was thinking, she doesn't want me to touch her, and she's experiencing that as, you know, now she's damaged goods, and so there was a very delicate, you know, very sensitive scene written to deal with that, and then just the fact that this character, that was one of the most beloved television characters in American history, had this experience, you know, took away so much shame that you can't even, you know, articulate what that meant to the American public. And the other thing was that so many people watched that show who would never watch a talk show or a documentary on rape. So it was sort of putting rape into the mainstream. And then after that, a lot of the other shows dealt with rape. You know, people that were involved with the Lou Grant. A lot of them decided to deal with it. So it opened a door, like he did with a lot of other issues, on that show.
And
then he was incredible and did wonderful things for the Rape Treatment Center ever since then.
And you had him as a supporter because you listened to your husband.
Yeah, that's right. Because he's such a wonderful man. Yeah.
Now, I wondered how, one thing that we should try to do, and I'll put this in the tape, we should try to get a copy of that
I have
show.
it, yeah.
So a copy should go into the archives with this, because I think that explains how you were able to successfully, then with this ally, get more interest in funding to help more people. This was a pivotal time. And what was the year that came about?
Yeah, I think it was 78.
Late 70s still.
Yeah, it was still the 70s. I'm pretty sure.
And now you have major source of interest. The TV has brought this back. You've been able to speak to 40+ million people.
Yeah.
What was the outcome? What happened?
With this show, with All in the Family?
With the rape center. What then happened? And with the concept of rape, what were you able to accomplish?
Do you mean in terms of how Norman helped me, or I'm not sure.
Not only,
I think the airing of that show.
What happened as a result of that show? Through Norman Lear, through other avenues that opened up to you because of the show.
One of the things that's really interesting is that, that led to a lot of other relationships and connections and,
awareness.
But the other thing that's really interesting is this has happened consistently, that rape and sexual abuse is so prevalent in this country that people who get involved with the Rape Treatment Center always end up learning that people they know have had these experiences. Like it happened to Norman and his company. All these women came forward and said it. And then there was another woman that people told me to contact. Oh, you have to get this person on your board. And I couldn't get through to her on the phone. And her husband owned a big company. And so one day she got a call from her husband's secretary who said, this woman's been trying to call you from the Rape Treatment Center. I never told anybody, but I was raped, and you have to call her back. And so it just...
Gail, we're going now, right before we stopped when the phone rang, and you took a call. And now we're going back to a woman insisted that her female boss...
No, her male boss. It was her... the woman I was trying to contact was a woman who was a philanthropist, known for being involved in the community. And the only way I knew how to find her was, I didn't have her home number, was through her husband's company.
Okay.
And so the secretary encouraged her to call.
So now you have she responds to your request to talk to her. And this was another opening?
It was another opening because she decided she was going to help me. And she was going to start, so she brought together a group of her friends, and I made a presentation. And
this led to something?
It did, actually, yeah. She brought together a group of people in her home, and she did two things. She brought together people, and she's on the board too. She became a board member, but it started to be a matter of people learning about what the Rape Treatment Center was doing, and then educating their friends about it. And
so networking.
Yeah, networking. And some of the people were in the motion picture industry, so some of them, I remember people would host evenings in their home. I would come talk, and I remember one evening somebody was there who was working on Lou Grant. He said, I think we could do something, we could do a show, and they did. And, on another evening, Quincy Jones was there, And so he became involved in helping us, and it just kind of it was a way of building and broadening the basic community support we had. So at first, when I felt like I didn't get support where I went for it first, and then decided to try other avenues, I think that it was really important in two ways. One, directly in terms of finding people to help me raise money. I needed to provide services for victims and develop other programs, but it was also so much of the need to deal with the problem of rape is a need to educate the public about rape. There's so many misconceptions and stereotypes and misinformation. So,
and how
we always connected the fundraising to doing education. And the first time we ever had a fundraising event, which was in 1979, we decided we wouldn't be like other charities and have entertainment or music. It didn't seem appropriate for this issue, and we decided we would have a program that would move people emotionally and educate them about rape. So we had this model for doing fundraising that's been very effective.
What is your model?
That we always talk about the work. So we always have victims speak about their experiences, and they're kind of unforgettable events.
So when you do have fundraising, you're not entertaining, you're not providing the normal situation. You're actually causing the people you're reaching out to interact with the victim.
Not direct, as an audience, usually, yeah.
Yes, but they're going to be listening to an actual victim.
Or a victim's parent, or...
So there is a live human being. It's not a scenario that's been created.
It's the reality
It's a reality of an event and how that affected the speaker, who's directly related, if not the victim, then someone who is closely associated with the victim. And reaching out to the audience that way.
Affecting them. Yeah, there's a great quote from Judith Herman, who's written a lot about trauma, sexual trauma, which is that, that the truth has to be, I'm paraphrasing it, but basically that the truth has to be told about terrible events, and when it's not told, it emerges as a symptom. And until the truth is told, the victim and the community can't heal. The narrative has to be told. And that's, I think, describes what we practice. And I think I've always found that if you tell people what's happening, that when your gut says this isn't right, and you tell people, you get support for changing it. You know what I mean? Like, I know it's not right that the police should not open those rape kits in the crime lab. We got to fix that, but more people in the community have to know about it. Or I know that rape victim cases shouldn't be thrown out because the victim didn't resist. But
you're treating people with respect when you do that as well, are you not? You're saying you're giving them an opportunity to be educated.
Right.
And through education to correct something that is a social ill, basically, or something that has fallen through the cracks and hasn't been addressed. So this approach that you've developed is because of the very nature of what the activity is. You're trying to sensitize and enlighten, at the same time educate people so that they understand what the ill is, and then they themselves can have themselves decide if they want to participate in eradicating this wrong. Mm-hmm. You're giving them that opportunity. Right. And this is a whole different way of approaching, at least certainly in the late 70s and 80s, an opportunity to participate and understand the need and to fill that void of treatment and acceptance and psychological support to a rape victim. Now, this was obviously successful again because your rape center has enlarged, not only as a role model, but able to, unfortunately, as the numbers of victims increase, perhaps the numbers are consistent, but more people are willing to come forward.
Right. It's hard to tell if it's more rape or more reporting, when you see an increase still today, because there's still so much not reported. So, but we've done other things that have increased the volume of patients we've seen, I think, so.
What have you done to increase the volume?
Well, if you want, do you want me to stay chronological, or, because the most recent thing we did was open this new forensic clinic, so now, of course, we see so many victims, we can't count them anymore. But probably what happened, what are we seeing now?
Yeah, I'd like you to define what you mean by forensic clinic.
Oh, well, this is the most probably recent thing that we've done, but we opened it in 1999. We started in the ER in the 1970s, but the ER just started to become not a good place to see rape victims. In the 70s it was the right place. It was open 24 hours. It was there. I didn't have to create a 24-hour response, medical care system. And around the country, most victims are seen in hospital ERs because police are used to going there with other kinds of social problems, and everything's activated 24 hours a day. But as ERs changed and hospitals changed, they're very overburdened. There's a lot of other trauma in the ER that rape victims would be exposed to. It's a very chaotic environment, and even if you have a place to sequester a rape victim, you can't take that intensity out of the environment because they're running around with, a code or a baby drowned or somebody stopped breathing. So victims were waiting long hours in most ERs across the country, sometimes 6 or 8 hours to get seen.
6 to 8 hours.
Yeah, unbelievably long. And, they're emotionally exhausted. They feel like they're not being taken care of.
And they can't shower. They can't clean
And the
themselves.
evidence deteriorates
right.
in so many ways, especially now with biological DNA evidence. And the cops are waiting. They're off the street for all this time. So we decided that we wanted to be out of there. And we really wanted to have our own facility. So the hospital, that meant I had to pay for it. I had to raise a lot of money. So I was trying to find somebody to fund it. The hospital had some space they said I could have. And it meant that we were going to have to hire our own medical care providers and, have a 24-hour medical.
Let me see if I'm where you are right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the very nature of what happens in an ER setting, you wanted to provide an emergency 24-hour, 7 days a week, rape treatment center where the victims could go and be examined by qualified medical help and the evidence preserved at the same time. And this meant that you were now carving a whole little niche for yourself.
I was going to have to create a new facility, basically, and
which would take tremendous funds.
Right.
And
so I had asked a few people, and then we were having one of our fundraising events. This is a great story. And I had, like every other thing I've done, I've conceptualized the problem and how this would solve it, and I have all my papers. I had
You've
shown.
done the research.
Yeah, I did the research and
have the numbers out.
And just the concept. We wanted to have a more safe environment, private. Rape victims the only priority. There's no other patient in there. Mm-hmm. So we were having our fundraiser, and we usually have celebrity hosts. Sometimes it's a TV show cast, and this year it was NYPD Blue. And I always try to get them to come to the Rape Treatment Center before the event, so when they stand up at the event, they know what they're talking about. So Jimmy Smits came to visit, and I showed him around, and he saw this. I had some empty space near my offices, and he asked me what it was, and I said, we have this dream. We want to have this clinic. We're trying to get funding, and I took him to Stewart House and showed him everything we do. And then at the end, I always talk to them about, what do you want to talk about at the event? What do you think, fits for you? And he said, I'm going to talk about the empty room. So I said, no, I don't want to do that, because he said, you need money. And I said, I don't want to ask people for money because they already paid to come to the event. And we used to do fundraising at the event. We don't do it anymore. He's like, no, you just never know who's in that audience. Somebody might do it. And so he was like, I wasn't going to convince him not to do it. So the whole cast does their thing, and it's his turn, and he talked about the rape treatment center is always state of the art, and they're so great, and they have this empty room, and they want to fill it with nurses and doctors and counselors, and it was very low key, and that he just put it out there. So the next day, this woman calls me and says, "I'm going to do it." It was somebody I had asked, and she hadn't. I didn't think she was going to do it, but she did. Because I still have my phone message from that phone call. So she gave us funding, and we.
What was the amount?
It's an endowment.
Okay.
So because we had no idea, and honestly, like everything else, you have no idea what you. I mean, you think you know what you're going to do.
Costs are.
And the volume, we're now seeing 2 or 3 new victims a day for emergency care. Sometimes we can have 8 or 10 on a weekend. I mean, it's incredible.
How long has it been operating?
Since 1990, like the middle or end of 99. So it's
it
a couple
was
of
in
years.
place by the end of 99.
It was in place, yeah. We had to do a lot of remodeling, getting the state to, sign off on because it's an emergency. Basically, it's an ER. It's in the hospital in a different location, separate from the hospital ER. But, it had to be able to provide emergency care, so it was quite a big undertaking.
So this now has permanent staff because it's a
Yes.
24-hour facility?
Yeah, we hired nurse practitioners to be the medical care providers. So we always have a nurse practitioner and a social worker on call or there 24/7. And we've become so busy that we always now have 2 teams, and we're almost at the point where we need 3 on call. So like this weekend, there's the primary team, a nurse and social worker, and there's a backup team.
Tell me your team. Who is your
The
team?
nurse practitioner and the social worker.
Okay, that's
Therapist.
2.
Yeah, that's it.
There's a nurse practitioner
And a counselor, therapist.
and a counselor
Mhm.
for the psychological issues.
Right, and they work together.
To preserve the evidence of the rape itself.
They do all the crisis
The rape
intervention,
kit?
psychological care. They do a complete medical exam, and they do the rape kit.
Okay,
And it's
so
a
there's
very state-of-the-art equipped with technology. It's amazing.
So they have 3 functions. The victim is stabilized emotionally as much as possible.
Oh, I mean, they do advocacy because a lot of times the police bring victims. There's a lot of decisions victims have to make about what they want to do. There's an overwhelming amount of information. You have to decide. There's certain things that are time sensitive,
All right.
so you have to decide about
What are you indicating as time sensitive?
whether or not you want to have emergency contraception, prophylaxis for sexually transmitted diseases. You can only have preventive treatment if you do it within a certain time frame. And then having evidence collected is also time sensitive. And there's certain kinds of injuries that can be like strangulation or drugging.
Is there photographic
Yes.
capacity there as well?
Yes.
And so the rape kits, these women are obviously, or I should say personnel, are obviously trained in how to preserve the evidence.
Yeah, it's very high tech now, and actually it's not good for places to do it that don't have the equipment or the knowledge, because you can really destroy the case, destroy the evidence, because we can get DNA evidence even from saliva on a breast, not just from semen.
Right.
So when we opened the clinic, we also saw really soon that we have a big commitment to police training, which I didn't talk about yet, but we do a lot of police training of detectives and new recruits at the academy, and on and on. But we really saw that the patrol cops, the first responders, had a huge impact on the outcome of our cases, and they were the least trained and the least knowledgeable about DNA evidence and about interacting with the victim. They're usually the young, the new. So we started a new program of first responder training. We're doing roll call training on every shift in a lot of police departments.
Do you have anybody going in at the academy prior to their completion of their coursework?
Yeah, we're part of the regular academy.
Curriculum now?
We are. But they, think they're so it's like law school,
Yeah.
There's so much going in. So you really have to, I always say you have to give them their vaccination and booster shots, because they just don't remember everything. But it happens now that somebody we had in the academy ends up in the clinic, and and we've actually added all this other stuff to the academy training that we didn't used to do.
So you're
like the
getting
first
them
responder
early.
stuff, we're really trying to make them partners with us, you'll come see the Rape Treatment Center. The
Yes.
clinic is great, and we have a room for the police, and we really, really work hard at those relationships. And
So what's happening is basically, this is beneficial all the way around.
yeah, it is.
Your victim is not only getting the support she needs and the emotional help that she's getting, but the people that are going to be in contact with her from a psychological, a social worker aspect, a law enforcement, a prosecutorial future team, all this is being saved at the same time where your goal so many years ago.
Right, that's funny. Came around, full
It's come
circle.
around.
Yeah. It's, the possibilities are phenomenal now with evidence, and they're going to grow even more, I'm sure. But it's so fragile, it can be lost. If
Yeah.
she goes to the bathroom and wipes herself, it's gone.
But all these things have
And they
not
didn't
been
know
known
that.
before,
No,
and
that's
now
right.
they are. So technically, you're seeing these advancements. But what about the response of the men in the lives of these female victims? How are they responding? Are they being educated to understand more about the needs and how to be a support
Yeah.
person to a victim
We always
through
see
your
the
counseling?
significant others. We see them in the emergency setting if they're
So
there
now
with the
you've
victim.
grown to the...
We did that a long time ago. Yeah, we always see the significant others in therapy. The other thing that we're doing with the clinic, though, now, which is, I think, really having a good impact, is that, aside from the victim's significant others, there's a lot of other people that aren't traditionally thought of as first responders that are, like RAs in college. The girl who's raped in the dorm tells the RA, or the sorority sister, or whatever, the fraternity
first-
brother, or whatever.
Right.
So, we've always tried to educate these people by going and giving talks on health, but now we've started having them come to the Rape Treatment Center, and we still do our educational program, and we show them the clinic. And it has a sobering effect to see this setting and learn what the victim goes through. It's just having a whole different impact than anything we've ever done in terms of them realizing, how serious this is, how traumatic it is, and how they can help somebody.
And how it's going to affect them,
Yeah.
the victim, how she, in ways that are subtle, that are unknown at the time of the incident. You don't know if 5 years down the line, this is going to affect how she's able to have a relationship with an individual, how she will be able to cope with being the mother of a female child.
Right.
I mean, there's...
Right. One of the things we're doing too now is victims who have genital trauma or injuries. We offer, nobody else does this, but we're offering follow-up visits at the Rape Treatment Center, because we have technology now, which I'll show you, which is amazing, which you can photograph genital trauma that you can't see with the naked eye. We have an instrument that magnifies the tissue, so I put this little thing under the other day to show somebody, oh, there's the Grand Canyon. You could see it's like a nothing on my fingers, or a red mark. So a lot of kids especially think that they're going to be scarred for life. Will somebody be able to tell? So it heals really quickly, vaginal trauma. So we have them come back, and they can see the healing. And it's also good for court, because sometimes the jury doesn't know what they're looking at when they look at the trauma. They can see the difference. So some of the technology has had other good outcomes besides forensic, and we have a way the victim can actually watch the exam on a TV screen if she wants. So they can see. So it can be really reassuring to be able to see why you feel uncomfortable, or what hurts, or...
And to be reassured.
Yeah, it's very reassuring, even for kids who think there's something damaged inside, or...
Right, or that think they won't be able to be reproductive.
Right, exactly.
I mean, and
Yeah.
The age of the victim, unfortunately,
It's like you wouldn't believe what we see.
unfortunately, I do believe it.
Under a year, we see babies and 82-year-old women, and
I've known of a case where a father raped his preschool children, 2 of them. One was, I think, about 2, maybe 3. the time.
So,
So-
but I see that's not.
I have water, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Actually, I have to go soon, so.
I would like to ask you if,
We have to figure out another time, huh?
it is now 2 o'clock, and we're ending the interview now, but this is going to be a part one of a more extensive interview. I'm hoping to go into more of what has developed at the clinic, and to get some of the documentation that you have, if you would share with us,
Oh, yeah.
because these are monumental things, how this has grown and developed.
And the other things I think that are major would be like our campus rape program, which became a national, and the drug-facilitated rape, which ended up doing something with Janet Rena, Attorney General.
Right.
But it was, again, taking something from the clinical setting and translating it into other social action.
What you're doing is you're finding in real life the problem, and you're finding solutions, so that at least you're not always reinventing the wheel.
Mhm.
As these
Right.
problems come up, as to the best of your ability, you are resolving what you can, even if it means changing legislation,
Right.
so that the problems will keep coming, but at least they'll be different.
Right. And changing the law doesn't change attitudes,
No.
but it's a start, because you're not having that resistance language in the courtroom every trial.
But you always will have doubters.
Right.
People that still today, I would imagine, at least a few years back, still didn't adhere to the concept that a man can rape his wife,
Right.
that these are still
Right.
concepts. Unfortunately now, or that you can rape a prostitute.
Right.
These were things that were
Right.
never accepted. Or the girl, by wearing provocative clothing, was, quote, asking
Right.
for it.
It's true.
I mean, all these things are unfortunately still issues. I want to thank you, and
Thank
we
you.
will, off the record, make another appointment.
Okay. Okay.
Let me stop this
How are we
now.
going to ever do that?
Saturday, May the 29th. This is the second part of the interview that began in November with Gail Abarbanel. This interview is taking place in Gail Abarbanel's office, which is at the Santa Monica Hospital. It is now approximately 10:30 in the morning. And I am Myra Amorosi, and I am conducting the interview with Gail Abarbanel. Gail, you indicated on the ending of the last tape that every legislative change came from an actual victim's plight, where the legislation as written was not effective for the victim at the time, and you realized that changes would have to be made so that future victims facing similar situations would be able to be involved in the legal action that it would take to stop the perpetrators. Is that correct?
Well, everything that the Rape Treatment Center has done, every form of social action, every legislative reform we've worked on, every program, every national community education campaign, every time we've tried to influence public policy through changing procedures or the way police or prosecutors operate, it's always come out of what we've learned from victims in our clinical work. And, so that's why I always say that the clinical work, the care we provide for victims, is the heart and soul of the Rape Treatment Center. It's the inspiration for everything. It's the guide for everything.
Now, what you've just presented, and for this recording, Gail has tremendous amounts of written material that she will catalog as to each step of the way things were developed and what led up to successful ventures, both legislatively and also in the physical establishment of the Rape Crisis Center in Stewart House. There's quite a lot of documentation, and these things will be put into folders having to do with each of the projects, whether it was a legislative change that evolved or a physical building or
Yeah.
space that was created. And we're going to go back now.
And some of the things have been changes in other agencies, like, getting the police department or the district attorney's office to implement changes, or the crime lab, or, other agencies that serve victims.
And when you
I don't have their archives.
Right.
I have my efforts to influence them.
But
To get them to be partners, that's really...
there are also going to be donations of your copies of training films that were developed that you've mentioned in the first tape, and the script for the Archie Bunker show, and also the Lou Grant. There was some script changes, I believe you mentioned.
I'm not sure I still have the Lou Grant script. I have to see if I threw it out when I was... But I'll look for it. Whatever I have, I'm happy to give, because, and interestingly, Norman Lear established a big center in the Annenberg School at USC, a public policy center.
I did not know
Yeah,
that.
so he's very involved with Jeff Cowan, who's the dean of the Annenberg School. And Jeff Cowan's wife, Eileen Adams, is the person I did a lot of this with. She was our legal counsel for 15 years. So she and I worked together on a lot of the legislative reforms, the campus rape program.
And
Circle.
it does.
Small world.
And what we had done is now indicated that you had funding for the Rape Crisis Center by an endowment. Am I?
No, well, we had funding.
Explain.
Okay, in funding for a clinic that's part of the rape treatment center, not for the entire rape treatment center.
All
Yeah.
right.
So did we already go through Jimmy Smith's?
Only that Jimmy Smits was a
Which is
speaker.
Part of it, yeah.
And
We, in the late 90s, we started to feel that the hospital emergency department was no longer the right place to provide emergency care and evidentiary exams for victims in the immediate aftermath of a sexual assault. Across the country, in most communities, rape victims who report these crimes or seek help are taken to hospital ERs. And hospital ERs, in the late 70s, I wrote about why the ER was the right place to take victims, because it was accessible 24 hours a day, and the staff were used to interfacing with police departments and collecting evidence and so forth. But so much has changed in hospitals. Hospital ERs are overburdened, crowded, chaotic, and they really have to give priority to other patients who have life-threatening illnesses and injuries. So typically what happens, and this is true across the country, the rape victim waits for hours to get care, and they wait in this chaotic environment. It's very hard to sequester them from all the other trauma that happens in an ER. So while they wait, their emotional trauma is compounded. The physical evidence, the biological evidence that may be on their body can be irretrievably lost because it deteriorates over time. And police are waiting sometimes for 8 or 12 hours for it to even start an exam. So we really wanted to create our own setting, our own emergency department, essentially totally dedicated to rape victim care for adults and children. And moving out of the ER meant that we would have to take over the cost of running a 24-hour emergency service, because when the care was being delivered in our hospital ER, the services were provided by the hospital ER doctors and nurses, and we had our rape treatment center counselors there all the time. So it was a huge financial undertaking.
how did you achieve getting there?
Well, we started to, as with everything else, we wrote a proposal, or kind of a needs assessment to document the rationale for making this change and how it would be helpful, what the benefits would be. We started talking to people who we thought might be interested in funding it, and I hadn't found anyone to fund it. The hospital had agreed to give me some space, which was next to where the rape treatment center offices are in the hospital building, separate from the ER. And we were having our annual fundraising event, and that year the hosts were the cast of NYPD Blue. And I always, when celebrities are hosting our events, I always ask them to come to the Rape Treatment Center before, so when they get up on the stage at the event, they'll know what they're talking about, and they won't sound like they're from outer space. You know?
Right, and in the past tape, you said you took Jimmy Smits through, and he asked about an empty area.
Right, so when Jimmy Smits came to visit the to visit the Rape Treatment Center, I took him for a tour, and he saw this empty space around our offices. He asked me what it was, and I told him that it was space the hospital was willing to give us, that we had a dream, that we wanted to turn it into a clinic to provide emergency care for victims, and that we were trying to raise the money. So at the end of our meeting, when I always ask them what they want to talk about at the event, he said, I want to talk about the empty room. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, maybe, you never know, maybe there's somebody in the audience that would want to support this. And I didn't want him to do it because I felt that we already charged people come to the event. They bought tickets. I didn't want to ask for more money at the event. He was adamant that you just never know. I can plant the seed, somebody might be willing to do it. So he, along with his fellow cast members, got up at the event, and he spoke about how the Rape Treatment Center was a great place, and it was state-of-the-art, and that they had this dream, they had this empty space, and they wanted to fill it with doctors and nurses and open a clinic. That was the end of it. So the next morning, I got a phone call from one of our board members, a woman who I had talked to about doing this because she just embodies the values and the spirit that I wanted the clinic to have, and she said, I want to do it.
So what happened
So
after
then,
that?
that was one of the best phone calls I ever had. So she created an endowment to provide funds.
Did she want this to be anonymous?
In the beginning, she did.
Is she now?
But she is not now anonymous.
Could you give her name?
Yeah,
now?
her name is it's called the Verna Hara Clinic. And
how do you spell that?
VERNA. I'll give you the materials about it too. It's HARRAH.
And it bears her name.
It bears her name, and it's one of the most incredible gifts anyone's ever given, I think, because literally every day somebody benefits from her clinic.
How long did it take to physically get this up and running from the time the endowment was created until the time you had your first victim?
I believe it probably took about a year because we really had to build the capacity to provide emergency care 24 hours a day, with all the infrastructure that takes in a physical setting.
It's 24/7, but on the weekend it's on call.
Well, it's 24/7. No, it's 24 hours a day. Sometimes the staff is on call in the middle of the night. But what happened when we opened? Well, first of all, it's exclusively dedicated to rape victims, 24 hours a day, and the staff is highly trained in the medical and forensic and psychological aspects of victim care. And we decided to hire nurse practitioners to provide the medical care, who are phenomenal.
They're
our
specially
advanced
trained.
Practice nurses,
Specially trained
who are
in
specially trained and very independent and autonomous. And we have a physician consultant, but they're really the primary providers of the medical care, and they it's become a highly specialized area of practice to collect evidence in sexual assault cases.
So they've been forensically trained, and they work with a social worker?
There's always a team, a nurse practitioner, and a social worker, a psychologist, a therapist. And since we opened the clinic, the volume of patients we're seeing has increased dramatically. So we now see about 3 new patients a day, 2 or 3 new patients a day.
Two or
there
three
are some
patients.
weekends when we can see 14 patients.
And how many teams do you have of
We
these
always-
two match people?
We always have 2 teams on call, and we're just on the kind of verge of having a 3rd backup because it's a very unpredictable influx of patients. So you can get, like Friday night, there was 3 at the same time at 5 o'clock. Sometimes they're spread out. It's just you can't predict when you're going to get another case. So, and then the staff can only do so many cases in a row. Because it's a very complex process providing this kind of care. And the diversity in the patients we see is incredible.
What year did you open?
We opened in 1999. It's a little complicated because we opened in one space while they remodeled. We were sort of working on space, but we actually opened in 1999.
And now you said that you've been seeing an increase in the volume because there are 2 to 3 victims that come through the center on a weekday?
Every day.
Every day.
Every day and night, not just day, but day and night.
In a 24-hour period.
Usually. I mean, sometimes it can be 4 or 5 in a day and quiet another day, but it's, average.
And the age range you said is all over.
The age range is infants to women in their 90s.
Infants to women in their 90s.
Right.
And
And from every walk of life, it is incredible. The diversity, even, I've been doing this work for 30 years, and I'm still amazed at just the diversity in, who this happens to.
there's no economic
There's
barrier
absolutely
to rape.
none. None.
Whether it's family,
It doesn't matter who you are, where you live, whether you work or you don't work, it's, and the circumstances in which the crimes occur are incredibly varied. You can be at home, you can be on the street, you can be in a nursing home, you can be in a hospital, you can be in a parking lot, you can be in a public place, on a bus stop. You can be in a friend's house. You can be 12 years old and go to sleep at your best friend's house and be raped by her father. You can be at school.
in the successful prosecutions now, do you see that more cases are being successfully prosecuted? Or has there been no change
I think
in the numbers?
it's hard. I don't know about the numbers because the numbers of cases prosecuted obviously relate. We see victims who are making police reports and who are not. So our population includes people who wouldn't get into the criminal justice system because they've chosen not to report their assaults to authorities. But in the cases that are reported, I think what's changed is that victims have more rights and protections in the criminal justice system. Definitely, the legislative reforms have accomplished that. But public attitudes and misconceptions about women and rape continue to affect the outcomes of a lot of cases and even filing decisions of DAs. So I think we're still dealing with that. I think that DNA is potentially powerful tool in prosecuting certain kinds of these cases. And one of the things that we're dealing with now in terms of the next public policy reform is how do we take advantage of the science that exists. We're not doing that. Rape kits sit on the shelf for 8 months while the rapist rapes other people instead of...
You have brought up something. Your primary focus is to assist the victim emotionally, psychologically, and to preserve evidence as well. But it is the victim's determination as to whether this is to be reported and go into the legal system. Is that correct?
That's correct. We encourage victims to report. We provide all of the support that we think can help them through that process. But we really respect their right to make choices, and we try to help them make informed choices. So one of the unique things that we do at the Rape Treatment Center that other hospitals do not do, that provide see victims in their ERs, if we have someone who doesn't want to make a police report, we encourage them to have all of the care, have all of the evidence collected, and we freeze it and protect the chain of custody. So if they ever change their mind, in 3 weeks or 3 years, the evidence is there. Most hospitals turn victims away if they are not going to make a police report.
Then you are not under any duty to report the crime that you become aware has occurred.
No, we have to report that a crime occurred. But
Explain that.
Okay. Hospitals have a legal responsibility to report to the police any felony crimes that they see the victim of. But the victim has an independent right to choose whether or not she wants to make a police report. So what we tell victims that the hospital has a reporting responsibility and what it is. So they always know that we're making a report. Sometimes they change their mind after they get the kind of care we provide, or see what the kind of equipment we have, that they have visible, that they have evidence. And obviously any child in this case has to be reported, but also adults, because they're...
By reporting, you report to the police.
You have to report to the police minimal information about the crime.
That includes the name of the individual, the date and time of the criminal activity, and when you had contact with the victim, I would imagine.
Yeah, because you have to report while they're here.
What other...
It's very, it's actually the same law. This falls under the same law as domestic violence, it's all about assaultive abusive conduct. So if the victim doesn't tell you certain information, you can't report it.
But you turn over the minimal that is required.
Yes.
And then it is up to the victim to decide whether or not she wants to participate in providing a full police report.
Right.
If the victim refuses to speak to the authorities, then you still have preserved what you have been able to get during the examination.
Right.
But that the case, when you have a complaining witness who refuses to participate, then the case does not proceed.
Right.
Okay. How long do you maintain the evidence that you have?
Forever. We haven't thrown away.
All right.
You never know.
You never know when somebody might have a change.
And look at the cold case work that's been done.
Yes,
now.
it's right.
And rapists are such high recidivist offenders. So,
I remember when I was in law school, I was told that rape is not a crime that is sexual, but it is a violent crime. It's a crime of violence rather than a crime of sexual motivation. And whatever psychologically has triggered this aggressive behavior is likely to occur again.
right.
And while your first alliance is to assist this person who has been victimized, it's a very fine line, I would imagine, as to you give them all the options, but their decision as to what they are to do.
And sometimes it's hard, because sometimes we see, we see a lot of college students who don't want to make police reports, don't want to deal with authorities, being raped on campus by other students.
There's
And
also-
you know that it's probably not the first time that offender has raped someone. But ultimately, can't coerce for things to do what they don't want to do.
Right. Plus the fact that I'm sure you discovered that culturally there are so many problems that different segments of society face with the rape. Historically, and I don't know today, but I'm interested in your response. Victims of rape often feel tremendously guilty for the act that's been done and blame themselves. And families sometimes participate in psychologically not being able to support the victim, but cause them to feel guilt that the act has happened, or treat them in a very negative way. So the psychological counseling that you're able to give, and is there follow-up for these victims that you provide?
Well, we provide psychotherapy and counseling follow-up, and everything we provide, everything is free, so people don't pay for any of the services. But we also provide medical follow-up, because a lot of victims really make a connection with a nurse practitioner, and especially victims who have genital trauma or genital injuries, or other kinds of injuries. It's very reassuring for them. We provide medical follow-up because it's very reassuring to them to see how they heal, but it's also forensically useful. If we photograph injuries when they're fresh and also photograph them during the healing, it can be very powerful in court to show the jury. There's a lot of times
But still, the coloration doesn't happen immediately.
Or even, like genital lacerations, they really heal quickly. And a lot of victims worry somebody will be able to tell by looking at them years later. Or, it's really nice to be able to, which is one of the gifts of Guanahera, to be able to provide the follow-up care. And then the victim also doesn't have to go explain everything to another provider. They don't have to worry. We give them all the medication on site for prophylactic treatment for STDs and emergency contraception, so they don't fill a prescription in the middle of the night. So it's very comprehensive, supportive care.
So
it's really nice.
And you do, at this point of time, because the endowment, this is a continuing base.
It's actually, the clinic budget has grown beyond the endowment. We have to continue to raise money because it just never anticipated what this would become.
And now you have the facility, state-of-the-art collection of evidence, and that you do have facility to store all these, all this evidence that you...
No, most of the evidence is given to the police because most victims do make police reports. It's the unusual case, I would say, where they don't. But we collect it for the police and give it to them.
Right, and you're also called then, if you've collected the evidence, that your staff has to testify.
Right.
So
that's the other thing that happened. I think we didn't anticipate the cumulative impact of doing so many exams. We did 800 or 900 forensic exams last year, and all the subpoenas and producing records, and it's like.
Although I'm
we need
sure
our own and we do everything. We don't. This is all done by the Treatment Center because the records are so sensitive. We manage that part of the process too. So, which actually is probably better not talk about because it's defense attorneys.
But I imagine that most defense attorneys, there are options of stipulating to the collection of the evidence.
Well, the evidence is collected according to a state protocol. You follow the guidelines in the state protocol. And we don't have. The cases are more. The issues in court are more about what the injuries mean. What
interpretation
from the injuries, yeah.
At this point of time, since this has taken on a life of its own, how do you maintain maintain the unforeseen amount of victims that are coming? You need more funding. So what are you doing to keep pace with the growth of the facility?
We're trying to find new ways to raise additional funds and also to build that endowment, but fundraising is a big part of what I have to do because between the clinics, Stewart House, and all the other treatment center services and programs, it's quite a large budget.
Tell us about Stewart House. What is Stewart House?
Stewart House is a wonderful place. It's located a half a block from the hospital on a residential street.
Its address?
I don't really want to give its address.
All right.
Because we're not careful about that, but it's down the block. Anyway.
It's in a residential area?
Yeah, it's on a residential block. And
what is the purpose of Stewart House?
Stewart House was created in 1988. When we had started, a couple of years before that, we started to see a lot more children at the Lake Treatment Center. It was around the time of the McMartin case in Los Angeles. There was an explosion of publicity about child sexual abuse nationally. Cover story of Time Magazine and Newsweek, and just a lot of attention focused on that issue. And we decided to expand our services. We got some seed money from a group called SHARE, S-H-A-R-E, a group of women, and they had never funded anything dealing with abuse. They had funded primarily mental retardation programs. But, we really were seeing that children who were sexually abused could have developmental disabilities, and the impact was so severe. So they gave us seed money to start a child therapy program, and we started to see children in therapy, and there was a pattern across so many of the cases. And so we documented the pattern, which was that once the child told somebody about the sexual abuse, if the family wanted to get help, they would have to go to 5 or 6 different agencies. And, the police department, the Department of Children's Services, the DA's office, the court building, the hospital, the counseling agency, at every place the child would be re-interviewed by another stranger. And a lot of these agencies were in environments that were very intimidating to children. And then none of these people talk to each other. The DCFS doesn't talk to the cops, and the DA doesn't talk to them. Everybody. So the poor family can't find out what's happening with the most important thing that ever happened to their child. And, no coordination. And a lot of these agencies have multiple people interview the child. The patrol officer, the detective, and then the detective's on vacation, so another detective. And there's a lot of research on children interviewing children that shows that repetitive duplicate interviewing is not helpful. And then none of these kids had access to expert medical exams. We had one 4-year-old who was getting 3 pelvics in a county clinic. It was horrible. DCFS would sort of alternate between taking no kids out of the home and taking every kid out of the home away from a non-offending parent. We had another little 4-year-old Spanish-speaking child who was taken away from her mother in the middle of the night. Her mother was not the suspect. Put into a foster home where no spoke Spanish. She wakes up in the morning. It's horrible. So none of our cases were being prosecuted. So we made a list of these problems, and we decided to do research, and we looked all over the country to see what other people were doing with child sexual abuse programs. We traveled to a few places. We went to Huntsville, Alabama, where somebody had taken services for children and put them in a house, and it was a very child-friendly setting. And we felt people were starting to do more to coordinate services for the child. So we came back home, and the hospital had a piece of property that wasn't being used. They had a dilapidated, boarded-up building on it, and they said we could renovate it if we could raise money. And then we decided to form a partnership with the district attorney, the police chief, and the sheriff, and the Department of Children's Services. We wrote up a little, which I'll give you the papers, and we went to meet with each of them, the chief public officials, and asked them if they would form a partnership with us, if we could raise the money. We asked them for 3 things. Would they be willing to outpost their personnel in our facility so we could have a one-stop service center for children and sort of look at the system through the child's eyes, is what we really asked. They'd be willing to outpost their staff, give us people to work on a task force to plan an innovative program, and would they be willing to make a commitment to vertical case management, which is one person from each agency has the case from beginning to end, and it's not 3 workers and 10 police officers. So surprisingly, we thought we'd have more trouble. They all committed. It was Daryl Gage, Sherwin Block, Ira Reiner, and Chaffee was the head of DCFS. It was around the time that the McMartin case was unraveling, and I think everyone realized we needed a better approach to child sexual abuse cases. So we took us about 2 years to raise the money and build. We had to build a new building.
How did the money come about? How did you beat the bushes to get the money?
It was, Eileen Adams and I did this together. We went to a lot of potential sources. And
how much money did it take to get started?
I hate to admit this, but we didn't really know what we were doing. We just...
Well, you now...
I can remember sitting in the hospital cafeteria with Eileen saying we were going to meet with the Stewart Foundation. It ended up being the Stewart Foundation was established the same year. They were the Stewart family owned the Carnation Company, and they sold their company to a big conglomerate and established a foundation for children, issues related to children. And it was the first year I felt we were in the right place at the right time. They gave us an incredible gift. I always say they gave us our roots and our wings. They gave us a 10-year commitment, gradually diminishing commitment over a 10-year period. Helped us build the building. We had to raise additional money, but they really gave us
it was your starting
enough to start and to have something every year. So the first year we went important about keeping the doors open. And then, so the idea was to have a multidisciplinary team based at Stewart House that would investigate the cases, police officers, the DAs, and the Department of Children's Services, and then, because we always want to do everything in a comprehensive way, to provide therapy for the kids and have a medical clinic. And
On
the
site?
medical clinic, yes, on site. The medical clinic was another really amazing, interesting story too. When I had worked on the All in the Family show with Lauren and Lear, there were a lot of women in this company who said, if you ever need help, come to us and we'll help you. They were very, a lot of employees disclosed they were raped when a woman was making the show. It was kind of an amazing process. Anyway, one of the women that worked for Norman, Barbara Brogliati, she was the head of PR, I believe. So, fast forward 10 years to when we were thinking about children. She was working at Lorimar, which was later sold to Warner Brothers. And one Christmas, in 1987 or 86, she decided that every year they gave all these lavish gifts to their producers and directors and celebrities, spent a lot of money, and one year she was going to take this money and make a difference in the community. So she called me up and said, what do you need? And I told her we needed a medical clinic to provide pediatric medical forensic exams for sexually abused children. So she gave the gift that let us start this child clinic, and it was originally called the Lorimar Children's Clinic, and now it's called the Warner Brothers Children's Clinic. So it was just another example of, I think just a really creative way to use money to benefit something in the community.
So
they send a card to all those people now saying that they're supporting the clinic.
Okay. That's
great.
That's the...
Yeah.
But the Lorimar Clinic, which is now the Warner Clinic, is a part adjacent to or
This
within...
was before we had the Birmingham Clinic. So this is complicated, but that was 1980, I have to look, 86 or 87. And we were, providing exams for sexually abused children, not the emergency exams, but all the scheduled exams. A lot of sexually abused kids don't tell until they've endured abuse for a long time. So
Now, Stewart House...
So Stewart House, we didn't put the medical care in the building of Stewart House. We put it up here at the hospital because we needed all the
So you had two
ancillary
locations.
services.
You had...
We don't really say two locations. We just did the medical exams up here.
All right, the medical was done
At the
here,
Warner Brothers Clinic.
and everything else with the teams that you've
Yes.
already mentioned
It's
remained
the
at Stewart
therapy.
House.
Yeah, and therapy services.
And at some point, did the care for the child move to a closer location to
No.
Stewart House?
Now, Stewart House is a half a block away.
So is it still established the same way?
Mhm.
That the medical care is here at Santa
Yes.
Monica Hospital
Right.
at a defined location?
Right.
And that all the medical workups come here?
Yes.
And the same thing, you preserve the evidence, you do what has to be done, as in the adult clinic.
Right. It's.
But
This is
the,
too complicated to explain because it's sort of, we're at a point where we're merging, so I don't really want to.
all right,
Yeah. So let's
but
just
at
say-
least
yeah.
in the past.
Yeah. Because we
Uh,
had the children's clinic before we ever had the Verna Hara clinic, for 10 years.
All right. And the
When we-
clinic you're referring to, that now, the Verna?
No, the children's clinic was the Lorimar Children's Clinic and then was renamed the Warner Brothers Children's Clinic.
All right, and
we
now-
still have that
Okay, so now we're talking about just the
for children.
the medical treatment takes place here under the name of Warner Brothers Clinic.
Right.
And that is different, and well,
It's
that's all we
it's-
have to
yeah,
know.
Yeah, that's all you have to know.
That's all.
The
we
problem
have
is
to
it's getting harder to, which I don't want to,
But right
talk
now,
about, but
you still have
you
the.
can't segregate them anymore because,
But certainly, what's going on at Stewart House
yes.
is still an ongoing, successful
Stewart House
venture.
is has had a huge impact. It's so much better for children to come to one place, be interviewed once instead of 10 times by a small group of people in a child-friendly environment. It's very therapeutic.
How many people can Stewart House? It's
They
not.
don't live there. They just come there for services.
All right.
Yeah.
And
It's not a residential treatment program.
so it is a visitation site
Well, they come for therapy every week. If they're getting therapy, psychotherapy, they come for their interview with the police instead of going to the police station, which can be very scary and intimidating for a little child. And they come for all the follow-up. So we have child advocates that coordinate everything. We have court school if kids are testifying in court and getting our cases. So it's really
What is your cutoff age?
18.
So it's from,
So Stewart House is different from the Ray Treatment Center in that the Ray Treatment Center has no restrictions on who can come, no geographical restrictions. Stewart House serves a geographic area because all the cases are prosecuted in one court.
had to be limited.
Yeah. So when we first opened, we took the West Judicial District of Court, Superior Court, which went east to La Cienega, north to Mulholland, and south to where you live, Florida. Then, after a few years, we thought we could see more kids at Stewart House, more kids could benefit. So we went to the presiding judge of LA County Superior Court,
Who then was?
Basket,
Jim Basket.
yeah, who redistricted Wilshire Division of LAPD into our, which is a high crime, high poverty, area that could really benefit from Stewart House. So they put all those cases into our jurisdiction. And then a few years ago, there was another independent of West County redistricting with Yvonne Burke and Inglewood, and they added Hawthorne and El Segundo to our,
Not Englewood,
no.
just
She wanted all the
Hawthorne.
Inglewood cases to be in Inglewood, not just juvenile court or something, I don't know. So Hawthorne is another 6 or 8 mile radius city with a very high crime rate and a lot of child sexual abuse. So they're now part of the Stewart House family too.
And,
They were just here last night because.
and what you're indicating then is that
So this
there's-
is, one thing that's really important is this has been a tremendous commitment from, Chief Bratton, Steve Cooley, Sheriff Baca, and the new director of DCFS, because it's only through their commitment of letting their staff work under the umbrella of Stewart House that we can continue to provide this kind of service.
But Stewart House is a geographic answer. There's limitations.
Yes, and people have, talked about, we've helped a lot of other programs get started across the country. There's now a national movement, a national organization of what's called Children's Advocacy Centers, which is what Stewart House is. We were one of the first ones.
And again, there's a role
But
model
there's-
that you've created.
And now there's they proliferate. They're all a little different. Sometimes they're sponsored by a public agency. Sometimes they don't have the therapy component or the medical component. We're probably one of the most comprehensive.
Now, you do have documents or
Yes.
a trail for a researcher to follow as to
I do.
how Stewart House came about, was created, how the concept became a reality, and the documents that you have will be in a folder
Yeah,
indicating
okay.
Stewart
Yeah,
House.
yeah.
All right. And Stewart House now does not have a duplicate in other areas of Los Angeles?
No.
Because it's still the only one?
Yeah.
So for children that are basically...
It's a lot of work to make a program like this work because you have people in your facility that aren't your employees. To manage a multidisciplinary team is a challenge.
Absolutely, because you...
I always say you have to rule by charisma, not by authority.
Well, you have competing
people-
objectives in some cases.
And just, to have a cop work in a setting without other cops and DAs. But we have multiple DAs now, actually, but we're actually just at the point where we need to expand the space at Stewart House.
Is that a possibility? It is.
It's a possibility.
How many children can you...
We see about 1 new case a day at Stewart House average. And then it's hard to, some kids are coming back because the cases are going to court, sometimes they don't go to court, some are coming for therapy, but that's pretty much the bottom of cases.
And I'd like to move on to another
Okay.
area, which is the campus rape
Okay.
program, because that's another whole segment, is
It
it
is,
not?
yeah.
Let me stop for 1 minute. Our next question, is there anything that you would like to add about Stewart House at this point before we go on to our next topic?
I think that Stewart House accomplished a lot of the goals. It reduced the number of times children are interviewed, increased prosecutions. It really minimizes the situations where children are removed from their homes because the cases are investigated and put together so much more quickly that they're not taking the kid, they're taking the offender out of the home instead of a child, So it really has accomplished a lot of goals, and it's so much better for the kids.
I would imagine that the one thing that is still an issue, though, is that sometimes parents are reluctant to accept the fact that this has occurred.
Sometimes parents don't want their kids to talk about it.
Right. Or
They don't want to believe it happened.
if it's the boyfriend
Or
or the father who is actually giving economic support to the family, or for many reasons, the mother is very reluctant in some cases to even face up to the fact of the abuse. When you're faced with those situations, do you have special counseling that you're able to attempt with the victim's parent?
Well, we provide counseling for the non-offending parents or caretakers.
Automatically?
Yeah.
Anything else that you want to discuss?
No, only that the other person who was instrumental in Stewart House was Frances Lear, who was died several years ago, but she was a survivor of incest, and she was very interested in the whole area of child sexual abuse. And when we opened, she helped fund some of the Stewart House services, but she also was publishing Lear's magazine around the time we opened Stewart House, and she supported the research and published this landmark article, which I took a copy of too, on incest in Lear's magazine. It was like a cover issue, and it was quite amazing. It was very informative, and that article she paid actually to create reprints of the article that were disseminated all over the country to educate people. So
About
she did in the magazine about incest.
About incest
Yeah.
itself,
Yeah.
and brought it to the point where it could be understood and the victims could benefit from her own background.
Right.
Okay, and there are articles there that will be included.
Yeah.
Written.
And I have a lot of articles about Stewart House. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, that also will
Yeah.
go
Okay.
into the folder, which
Right.
will be
I
like
think of all these things when I'm talking about it.
Stewart House.
Yes, right.
All right. The other area that I'd like to bring up now is the campus rape program. You've been involved. But it's tape 2, second side of tape 2, fourth side of the recording. Again, we're still in Santa Monica. Interview with Gail Abarbanel. Now we are discussing campus rape, how the program was started, approximately the first formal year. What year did all this start? Your actual work in campus rape?
Well, the work started probably in 87. We had a sudden and dramatic increase in the number of victims coming to the rape treatment center who were college students who were raped in campus settings. And it was the same as Stewart House. There was a pattern, similar issues in a lot of their cases, and they were students not just raped on Southern California campuses, but some of them were raped in the South, at the East Coast, and came home, and ended up coming to the rape treatment center for help. And we realized how prevalent this was, how vulnerable this age group was. Most of these students said that if they tried to seek any support or redress on campus, there was none. They were treated in a very discriminatory and discouraged from reporting away. Most of them said they never received any information about rape when they started college, even though we felt it was a known danger. And it was there were no freshman orientation, rape programs then.
This is 87.
And there were no services for victims, on these college campuses. And frankly, most colleges, really didn't want to deal with this issue at that time, I think. So we really felt that there were things colleges could do to reduce these crimes and also to provide more support for students who were victimized. So Eileen and I, again, we decided to write a book called Sexual Assault on Campus, What Colleges Can Do. And we wrote about the cases we had seen, and we had like a 10-point plan we wanted colleges to adopt. We explained the problem. This isn't each one marked up, but and we had recommendations about what we thought colleges should do. So we wrote this book, and somebody on our board underwrote a national mailing, so we sent it to every college president in the country, like it was a call to action, and we had a press conference to announce. We really broke the issue in the national press.
What year did this get
And then I have a lot of press clippings. There was an article in the New York Times.
assimilated? When did you send
The book was 1988,
All right, and again, it's a blue book, and the title,
which I'm going to give you a copy of.
Sexual Assault on Campus, and in white it says, What Colleges Can Do. And it's authored by Gail Abarbanel and Eileen Adams. I can't imagine that the college campuses took this with open arms.
No.
Mainly because historically, colleges, from my limited experience, don't want to discourage students from coming to school by the reality of what might potentially be a rape situation. They want to give the aura that they have safe and protected campuses. So what was
Right. Well,
the reaction to your mailing?
I think one of the problems was, as we started to work on this issue, was that the colleges, if the colleges start to do the right thing, they're going to have an increase in the number of students who report rapes. And it looks like an increase in their crime rate. It's not. It's just that the secret number of cases is coming to the surface, which was previously hidden. So
People
what
are
we
talking
tried
about
to do is get colleges to see that if you're doing a good job, it's going to look like you have an increase. That more cases mean you're doing a good job because the students feel safe reporting these crimes and coming forward. That was a hard, transition to make, and I think colleges still worry because the other thing that happened at the same time is that the Cleary family, Howard and Connie Cleary, whose daughter had been raped and murdered at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania, launched a campaign to force colleges, and they got federal legislation passed to force colleges to publish their crime statistics because they felt colleges were hiding these cases.
And that year, do you recall?
Sure, it might have been 92. I'm not positive. There were several bills that got passed over time. We really felt that with rape, forcing colleges to publish their crime statistics wasn't going to be that illuminating because most rapes aren't in the college rape statistics. Most college students, if you can get them to do anything, go for medical care and maybe for counseling, but they don't report to authorities. So anyway, the other issue was at that time, which has changed a lot now, is that there were a lot of issues on college campus related to security and physical and safety. A lot of the stranger rapes that were happening at that time were related to policies that left dormitory kids would prop open the dormitory doors with beer cans or bicycles, and there were now most of them have those security alarms, so if anybody tries to prop open the door, an alarm goes off. And there was a lot less policing who came in and out of dormitories, so part of our recommendations had to do with safety. But we wanted colleges to develop conduct code provisions and change their policies, offer services for victims. You know, we had so we published this book, we sent it to every college president, we had this big press conference, which was attended by every television channel that existed. It was huge. It was really interesting. It was probably the most difficult press conference we ever had, because I think a lot of the male reporters were kind of had a hard time assimilating the information we were giving about the prevalence of rape on
Where did
college
this
campuses.
take place, this conference?
We had a press conference. I think we had two at Campus Rape, when we published our film. I can't remember where it was. I think it was at one of those places where you hold press conferences.
Where are we talking about,
Oh, it was
California?
LA. Yeah, it was Los Angeles.
Okay.
The other thing
Because
that we
this is a
did-
national issue.
But it was on national media. It was picked up by the national media. We were on television. I think we were on the Today Show and Good Morning America, CNN, and we also traveled to New York to appear on those shows.
In the
Oprah,
90s?
maybe. Yeah, it was 88. We had two. We produced this book. We also then started meeting with various college presidents where we had relationships or knew someone to encourage them to, talk about this problem, encourage them to adopt our plan.
You surely weren't doing this one college at a time. You had to have these,
Well, no, we met with a few
Seminars.
colleges like USC and UCLA and Stanford.
like groups of colleges.
Well, no, we went to a few college presidents
Oh, you
individually.
did?
Yeah. But we also did this national campaign, and so we produced the book. We sent it to every college president. We spoke at a lot of college conferences with college administrators. It was very visible.
And you spoke about a tape.
And then we decided we needed to do something to get information to students. So we decided to make a film that we could disseminate to colleges across the country to educate their students about rape.
And you have a copy for us.
Yes, so we made a film that we could, finished in 1990, and somebody underwrote 5,000 videotape copies of the film. We made it available to colleges all over the country, and it's really disseminated widely. It's pretty dated now, but it was called Campus Rape, and at that time, LA Law was a very hot TV show, and Susan Day and Corbin Bernstein narrated the tape.
And how
And we
was...
filmed a little piece of it at USC.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. I think we filmed the Killing McGill as part of USC.
How were the students exposed to this tape? I mean,
It was used we had some of our clients participate in the tape. There were 4 victims in the tape. And it was shown at, first year student orientation, fraternities, sororities, all kinds of, we would get feedback about kids who saw the tape, for schools all over the country.
so what I hear you saying is that in order to have the students be exposed to it, you went through the colleges
No.
agreed?
Well, colleges bought the tape and used it however they wanted in their programming.
But it was used sometimes in orientations,
Yes.
sometimes through the fraternities or
Right,
sororities.
or residential life,
Or
it
even
was
when...
shown widely to students in education programs.
Good.
And then we also produced a lot of posters that we still do, that are posted, put up at various places on campus used to educate students about rape and sexual assault. And then when rape drugs became an issue in the later 90s, we launched a national campaign to provide information to colleges about rape drugs too. So we're still very active. I think we've really had a leadership role. A lot of the recommendations that we had in this original book in 1988 for colleges have been adopted in colleges nationwide. Most of them have written protocols, changed their conduct codes, included, we were really advocated for, the other reason we wrote the book was that the students we were seeing who were victims who tried to seek redress had no rights in the campus judicial proceedings, and the accused students had a lot of rights that were very unfair. So in the book we advocated for more parity and for giving victims rights and protections in campus administrative hearings, like, right to protect their sexual history, right to be accompanied.
Sounds very repetitive of
Yeah.
children's rights,
It
does
is,
it not?
yeah, same thing.
So
And
the
then we
grown-up...
also found that the student victim who went through a judicial hearing didn't have the right to know the outcome. So we went to our congressman, who was now Lamine, who was previously the assemblyman in California who worked on our resistance legislation, and he drafted legislation which was passed to give victims the rights to know the outcomes of campus judicial hearings. That was federal.
And that's federal now.
Yeah.
Your work that went into the book, just briefly, what kind of research went into producing this original pamphlet? Where did you get your material?
Well, we had a lot of case examples of the problem from our work here at the Rape Treatment Center. We did a lot of research, in campus publications and legal publications. I did this with a lawyer. And I think we always our way of conceptualizing problems was to look, when you see patterns across a number of cases with victims, it usually represents a policy, broader. So we combined our experience with victims. We went with victims to judicial hearings. We helped advocate for victims that we were seeing here around these issues. And then we just did a lot of research on what was in the literature. We looked at, we surveyed a lot of campus codes and policies.
But this was the first book that ever approached in a comprehensive way the circumstance of campus rape.
Right.
And in this book, there's prevention. You talked about...
There's a lot of policy and procedural recommendations, and also one of the recommendations was to provide prevention, to provide information for students when they're incoming students and ongoing.
And you've seen most of these things that
A lot of these most college codes now have rights for victims.
So this work that you did on creating this blue manual has really helped students across the United States at this point in a relatively short period of time. Because you're indicating that was in the early 90s, did you say?
The book was 88.
Mm-hmm.
Same year we opened Schoolhouse.
Okay, so from 80, busy year.
Yeah, busy year.
How do you find the time? You're talking about...
a lot of the writing I have to do at home. I can really do it.
What are your work days like?
Long.
What's long?
I usually come to work at 7:30. I go home at 6. 7:30 at home. I get home after dinner. I work a lot.
What you've accomplished, and these projects are all ongoing. It's not as if one gets completed and you go on to the next.
Right, but now we have, I have a staff person who does a lot of the campus educational stuff. And, it's not me doing all the speaking. So
you're talking about very complex, time-consuming areas that you're still very much involved with. Here at the hospital, Stewart House, campus situations, legislation that you're always paying attention to. It would seem that the time that you have... What are you doing with the police?
Well, when we opened the clinic, I think we became much more, and it was a combination of opening the clinic and just where we are in terms of the science of DNA and forensic and medical technology all kind of came together. It became so clear that what police do in the immediate aftermath of a rape when they get a report can have such an influence on the outcome of the case. Acts of omission or commission. They can either retrieve, protect evidence, or destroy it. So we have a new first responder program that involves a tremendous partnership and outreach with the police. We're doing roll call training, detective training, extensive training, thousands of officers a year on these issues. And we just had the first ever Los Angeles Chiefs Conference on investigating sexual assault crimes. And we gave all the sex crime detectives in the city of LA new sexual assault crime scene evidence kits. So they can be more effective in rape cases at the crime scene.
This is in Los Angeles.
Yes.
Do you have plans to take this statewide and then perhaps?
I'm hoping that we can, sort of package it or produce materials that enable other people to do it in their own communities. And that would be the most efficient thing to do.
What are the key things, if you can give us a brief description of how you're updating this training, so that the police officers are outside of the range of the Rape Crisis Center here. How are the officers that you're planning to touch outside of this jurisdiction? What type of innovations are you making in their training?
It's giving them the tools. Sometimes that's knowledge and sometimes that's skills. Knowledge about sources of DNA evidence and how to protect it and preserve it. And sometimes it's skills, how to interview victims, because that can be the key to knowing more detail about the solid information. So it's really, I think, institutionalizing the training. So you can't just go do this once. You know, you can't just say, I trained the detectives and that's it, because there's so much turnover, there's so much other stuff. So we're trying to, we have, it's much more organized and institutionalizing it, and we formed a partnership with Chief Bratton to do this together. So he's made a commitment to enhance what the detectives are doing, and he's reorganizing the department so the detectives can be deployed on a 24-hour basis for rape cases. So, you know, I think a lot of this is about forming partnerships and educating, if we have the ability to produce materials or develop training programs, being able to disseminate them to other people who can use them, whether it's, you know, the film on campus rape or training modules for the police. We just produced a brand new magazine for teenagers that we'll make available for other rape crisis centers around the country to use in their programs.
Where are you getting the funding to produce these?
From grants or donations or different sources.
Because each thing that you've mentioned,
It's big thing.
you're talking about a great deal of financial commitment. You've just shown me a magazine,
Really hot off the press.
which is How It Happens, with college-age people, and it says rape can happen to anyone, how to help a friend. I'm sure we'll get a copy for that. It's not a guy problem, is it? And it looks like it's the type of thing that is very appealing. And
It was designed for adolescents.
so this means that you had to have somebody, this is,
We had a graphic designer do it.
and a graphic designer
Who understands.
gets
the work.
paid.
Yes, that's true.
There's money.
So the printing costs money too.
Right. And all of these things are not, because these are not budgeted, these things.
No, I mean, this is actually something that fits into our school program, and we have a high school program that reaches about 10,000 kids a year. It's funded
How do you fit into the high school program?
How do I?
Yes. You said we have
We have a high school program and a middle school program. We have prevention programs. So we have staff that work go into high schools, teach kids a prevention program,
Okay.
and then they're going to be giving these out to the kids who are in the program.
Gail, you are the director of the Rape Crisis Center.
Rape treatment center.
Rape treat, the proper title.
Yes,
is
rape treatment center.
Rape treatment. And so you are a salaried employee
Right,
and director.
right.
What other organizations do you head at this point or participate in?
Well, I'm the director of the Department of Social Services for the hospital, which the Rape Treatment Center is part of. So under the Rape Treatment Center umbrella, we have Stewart House, the high school program, the middle school program. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Answering your question? Okay.
Yes.
The clinic.
So,
Is that what you're asking me, like the
well,
organization?
you're
Or
getting,
structure?
I'd like to know where your tentacles go.
Oh, okay.
You mentioned education of law enforcement.
That's all part of the Rape Treatment Center's work. Yeah.
So as director of the Rape Treatment Center,
Yeah, these are all programs.
I don't know how you have time to sleep, I guess is basically
Oh, I don't know.
listening.
Hey, wake me up. So these are all, this kind of all comes under here.
What you're showing us is another thing that we'll be getting for the archives. This is called Rape Treatment Center, Santa Monica,
That's
UCLA. And it's the brochure which in part I'm sure, because when you start mentioning all this national commitment that you've got, it's marked right here as National Campus Rape Program, Stewart House, Warner Brothers, Children's Clinic, everything. And is this a comprehensive list of the things that you're involved in? Or
Yeah, it is.
because
Yeah.
to hear you speak, you leave me breathless with all these different interests.
But I mean, there's like a lot of people on the staff that do this.
I'm glad to hear
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I can do all this.
I was getting very intimidated.
I can't do a pelvic, you know.
How many staff are there that you're involved with?
There's probably, there's like 45 people, including the nurses and the Stewart House, you know, the clinic, the Stewart House, staff, therapists, the school program. There's a lot of people. And 24 hours a day.
Right. Which is
A lot
required.
of them.
I'd like to,
So this helps organize what they do.
right,
With assistance and that you can-
okay, because yes, I mean, you, now, there's the Stewart House. Now that we've reached the conclusion of the interview, you just said people ask you. What do they
Well,
ask?
people always ask me, how can you do this work? It must be so hard. And I always say I can't think of more inspiring or rewarding work. You know, I love what I do. I feel rewarded every day. I come to the hospital, there's a police car parked outside. I know they're in the clinic and not in the ER. I feel good. And I really, I feel like I got here for two reasons: my parents and some of the professors I had at social work school. I really do.
You mentioned this
Yeah.
when you started.
Alice Overton was one of my professors. I just was looking through stuff a few weeks ago on SUS, what I had written about her, how she influenced me when I spoke at her memorial service, and Barbara Solomon, who was like a real mentor, who's still there.
And you said that the start really was your parents always helped out by having people, young people, come to your home. and
Yeah, my
educate.
parents were kind of
They
social
weren't
work oriented. No, they weren't social workers at all, but they were involved with Vista Del Mar when I was growing up, so I used to go there, and my mother volunteered there. It was very different then. It was really like a Jewish orphanage. And my father has just always been a person who gives to other people. He's always helping people out. He's just a very sweet, kind man. He's 90 now, but
Where were you raised?
in LA, Los Angeles. I went to high school.
You did?
Yeah. I went to pass. Yes, I did.
And what year did you graduate?
From high school, 66.
And
Wait,
what-
60. No, I'm sorry, 62. I
19
graduated from UCLA in 1966 and from USC in 68. I went straight through school.
Do you have brothers or sisters?
No.
An only
Cousins,
child?
yeah.
Because it's quite obvious that this is not a profession for you, this is a life.
Right. And I didn't, when I graduated from social work school, I did something else. You know, I didn't plan to do this. It wasn't, it just kind of happened. But
You carry on and carry through and follow through in ways that you could have been a corporate executive. I mean, this is quite clear by the way you deal with the problems and solve them. And you don't give up, and you're tenacious, because there's a tremendous amount of education that you have to have people go through in order to understand what the needs are. And I don't see you sounding tired or ready to give up. You're still in the fight. And I want to tell you, it's been an amazing interview for me, who have interviewed thousands of people. I have to tell you, this has really been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Vice versa, too.